Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The sound of the Zenari forces echoed through the streets, a dreadful symphony of alien chittering, scraping limbs, and the hum of their energy weapons charging. Captain Elias Voss rose to his full height, shoulders squared, as though some unseen weight had been lifted from him. The haze of exhaustion that had hung over him for days was gone, replaced by a strange clarity. "Captain, they're coming back in force," Greer shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I know," Voss replied, his tone steady, eerily so. "They're making a mistake." Greer blinked. "Sir." Voss turned to face his remaining squad. His eyes, once dulled by fatigue, now burned with an intensity that sent a chill down Greer's spine. "Get everyone ready. Spread out and take cover. I'll draw them in." "Alone? Are you insane?" Greer asked, stepping forward. "We can't just." "That's an order, Lieutenant," Voss said sharply. "Trust me." The squad exchanged worried glances, but Voss's authority was undeniable. They melted back into the ruins, positioning themselves with whatever cover the shattered city could provide. Greer hesitated for just a moment before following the others, casting one last look at Voss. The captain stood alone in the street now, the strange alien artifact still pulsing faintly behind him like a heartbeat. His grip tightened around his plasma rifle as the first wave of Zenari appeared in the distance, their grotesque, insect-like shapes silhouetted against the rising sun. "Come on," Voss thought. "Let's see what you've got." The Zenari surged forward, a dozen armored soldiers leading the charge. Their multi-limbed bodies moved with unnatural speed, energy weapons glowing faintly in their clawed hands. Voss ran toward them, but this wasn't running like before. He was fast, inhumanly so. The ground blurred beneath his boots, his senses alive with hyper-awareness. He could hear the whine of weapons charging, pinpoint the exact moment a Zenari raised its rifle. He dodged the first shot as though the world had slowed to a crawl. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, narrowly missing him. Voss zigzagged, closing the distance in seconds. The first Zenari didn't even have time to react before Voss's plasma rifle barked. A bolt tore through its thorax, and the alien collapsed in a heap. Voss was already on the next one, sliding low beneath a flurry of claws. He spun, slamming the butt of his rifle into the creature's midsection with enough force to crack its carapace. It shrieked and crumpled. Voss pivoted again, his reflexes unervingly precise. A Zenari charged him head-on, serrated claws slicing through the air. Voss sidestepped and grabbed its weapon arm, twisting. "Bones, if Zenari even had bones," snapped audibly. With a roar, Voss tore the alien's own rifle from its grip and shot it point-blank in the head. This isn't possible," Voss thought distantly. But there was no time to reflect. More Zenari swarmed the street, screeching in rage at the lone human tearing through their ranks. Voss moved through them like a force of nature, faster than they could aim, stronger than their armor could withstand. Every movement was deliberate, efficient. Plasma fire lit the street, followed by the sickening thuds of alien bodies hitting the ground. From the ruins, Greer and the remaining squad members watched in awe. That's not human," one of the soldiers whispered, his hands shaking as he gripped his weapon. Greer couldn't look away. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched Captain Voss single-handedly decimate the Zenari. It was like watching a war machine, a being sculpted for battle. And yet, that was their captain. A man they had shared meals with, laughed with. Whatever that artifact did to him, Greer said quietly, it made him something else. Voss stood in the center of the street now, surrounded by Zenari bodies. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. The enhancement still burned through him, a strange fire in his veins that made him feel alive. More alive than ever before. But it wasn't over. He could feel them. More Zenari, regrouping deeper in the city. Something larger was coming. And then he heard it. A low rumble shook the ground. Voss turned his head sharply toward the sound. Over the horizon, a Zenari dreadwalker appeared, a towering war machine on 4 massive mechanical limbs, its insectoid structure looming like a god of death. Cannons and energy emitters jutted from its armored torso, glowing faintly with power. That's new, Voss thought, grimly. Behind him, his squad emerged from cover, their faces pale. Captain, Greer called out, what do we do about that? Voss turned to them, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. We kill it. The soldiers gawked at him. Are you serious? One asked. Dead serious, Voss replied. But I'll need your help. You flank it. Draw its fire. I'll find a way to take it down. Take it down. Sir, that thing's got shields. We don't have heavy artillery. Greer protested. Voss's gaze hardened. We don't need heavy artillery. We just need a plan, and guts. Now move. The squad didn't argue this time. They dispersed into the ruins, scrambling to find vantage points. Voss adjusted his rifle and started walking toward the dreadwalker. Each step felt heavier now, as though the weight of his choices, and the power flowing through him, threatened to crush him. Let's finish this, he muttered. The dreadwalker turned its massive head, its sensors locking onto Voss. A shrill hum filled the air as the machine's main cannon powered up, its energy field pulsing violently. Here we go. The cannon fired, a beam of blazing energy scorching the ground where Voss had been a second earlier. He dodged, impossibly fast, leaping onto the ruins of a nearby building. The enhancements made him light, quick, capable of jumping distances no human could have managed. He scaled the structure, using its height to get closer to the war machine. Focus fire on its left side. Voss shouted through his comm, hit those joints. From the ground, his squad opened up, their plasma bolts striking the dreadwalker's limbs. Sparks flew as the machine turned its cannons on them. But that was its mistake. Voss was already leaping from the rooftop, rifle in one hand, a grenade in the other. He landed on the dreadwalker's armored plating with a deafening clang. The machine shuddered, trying to shake him off. Voss didn't falter. He tore open an exposed access panel near the machine's midsection, revealing a nest of glowing circuits and wires. Without hesitation, he shoved the grenade into the opening. Say goodnight, he growled, kicking off the dreadwalker's side. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Behind him, the grenade detonated. A fiery explosion erupted from the dreadwalker's torso. The machine staggered, sparks and smoke pouring from its damaged core. It let out one final screech before collapsing onto its side with a thunderous crash. The street fell silent. Voss stood, breathing heavily, surrounded by the smoldering remains of the dreadwalker. His squad emerged cautiously, their faces slack with disbelief. Greer approached him, shaking his head. Captain, how did you do that? Voss turned to him, the faint glow of the alien artifact still reflected in his eyes. We're just getting started. The aftermath of the battle hung over Eden 9 like a funeral shroud. Smoke coiled into the skies, where the Zenari warships loomed ominously, their silhouettes fading into the upper atmosphere. For now, the aliens had retreated, but every survivor knew this was just a pause. The next wave would come, stronger and hungrier for blood. Captain Elias Voss stood near the smoldering wreckage of the dreadwalker, its twisted metal body a monument to human defiance. Around him, his squad moved quietly through the rubble, their faces pale and eyes hollowed by exhaustion. They had won, if you could call it that, but no one dared celebrate. Sir. Lieutenant Greer approached cautiously. Fleet Command is asking for a status report. Voss's jaw tightened. Put them through. Greer handed him the comm tablet, its cracked screen flickering to life. A stern-faced admiral stared back, his uniform crisp despite the chaos unfolding across the colonies. "Captain Voss," the admiral began, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "We've received your report about Eden 9's loss. I see you encountered new Zenari tech, a Dreadwalker. How did you neutralize it?" Voss met the admiral's gaze, debating how much to say. Finally, he answered, "Tactical improvisation, sir. We targeted a weakness in its design." The admiral's eyes narrowed. "You're being vague, Captain." "I don't like vague." Voss glanced back at his squad, ensuring they weren't listening. He turned his attention back to the comm, with respect, "Sir, it's classified until I report directly to Earth Command. There's something here you need to see." "Classified?" The admiral frowned. "I don't have time for games, Voss. If you're hiding something." "Eden 9 is lost, Admiral," Voss cut him off, his tone steely. "If we don't act now, Earth will be next. Get us off this rock, and I'll show you." The admiral studied him for a long moment before giving a reluctant nod. "Understood. The Aurora will rendezvous with your position. Be ready." The screen went dark. Voss turned to find Greer watching him curiously. "What did you mean by classified?" the lieutenant asked. Voss didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the alien artifact, now half buried under rubble, its surface still pulsing faintly. "That's what I meant." Greer frowned. "That thing? What is it?" "I don't know," Voss admitted, walking toward it. "But it did something to me." Greer followed, a mix of awe and wariness on his face. "I mean, yeah, you were different back there. Faster, stronger. You took down a Zenari Dreadwalker like it was a toy. What does this thing do?" Voss crouched beside the artifact, placing his gloved hand on its surface. The moment he touched it, the glow intensified, and for an instant, images flashed across his mind, images of something ancient, something powerful. A voice, alien yet familiar, whispered faintly. "You are chosen." Voss jerked his hand away, gasping. Sweat beaded on his brow. "Captain?" Greer asked, stepping back. "What's wrong?" Voss stared at the artifact. "It's not just technology. It's alive. Or, something close to it." "Alive?" Greer looked at the glowing surface as though it might bite him. "That's impossible." "Maybe," Voss muttered, "but it doesn't matter. Whatever this is, it's the key to stopping the Zenari." "How can you be sure?" Voss stood, his expression hard. "Because it chose me." Hours later, the Federation cruiser Aurora roared into Eden 9's atmosphere, its engines parting the smoke and ash like a blade. The massive vessel hovered over the colony, its landing bay opening with a mechanical hiss. Voss and his squad moved quickly, carrying the artifact onto the ship under heavy guard. Marines flanked the group, their weapons trained warily on the alien object. None of them said a word, though their uneasy glances spoke volumes. In the medical bay, Voss sat on an exam table as doctors poked and prodded him, muttering to themselves as they studied their instruments. The scans didn't make sense, his vitals were stable, better than stable. Heart rate, oxygen levels, neural activity, everything read off the charts. "You're telling me he's perfectly healthy?" one of the doctors asked. "Better than healthy," another replied, looking baffled. "Captain Voss's muscle density has increased by nearly 50%. His neural pathways are firing at levels I've never seen. And look at this, his body is repairing cellular damage almost instantaneously." Voss sat quietly, clenching his fists. He could feel it, the strength, the energy coursing through his veins. It felt like a second heartbeat, something alien, something more. "Captain," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Voss looked up to see Admiral Hayes standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed guards. His expression was unreadable. "Follow me." The artifact had been secured in a research lab, surrounded by containment fields and a team of Earth's top scientists. It pulsed gently, as though breathing, casting faint shadows across the walls. "Explain," Admiral Hayes ordered. Voss stepped forward, his eyes on the artifact. "This is the answer to the Zenari. Somehow, it enhances us, makes us stronger, faster, smarter. I touched it. I felt it." The Admiral folded his arms. "And you think this can be replicated?" "Yes," Voss said without hesitation. "Imagine an entire battalion of soldiers enhanced like me. The Zenari wouldn't stand a chance." One of the scientists cleared his throat. "With respect, Captain, this artifact is completely alien. We don't understand it. Whatever it did to you could kill someone else. Or it could save billions," Voss shot back. The Admiral held up a hand. "Enough. We'll study the artifact. Captain Voss, you'll remain under observation." "With all due respect, sir," Voss replied, his voice low, "I don't have time for observation. The Zenari are coming. You know it. If we don't act now." "Enough, Captain." Hayes barked, his voice echoing through the lab. "You've done your part. Let the scientists do theirs." Voss glared at him, his fists trembling at his sides. The fire inside him burned brighter now, as though the artifact's power refused to be silenced. "I hope you're right, sir," Voss said coldly. "Because if you're not, we won't survive what's coming." That night, Voss sat alone in his quarters aboard the Aurora, staring out at the stars. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a reflection he barely recognized. The power was still there, humming just beneath his skin. It felt intoxicating, like a drug he couldn't quit. But in the quiet of the dark, a question gnawed at him. "What is this doing to me?" Voss clenched his fists, the faint glow of the artifact still dancing behind his eyelids. "Harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. But at what cost?" The stars blurred past the viewport of the Aurora as it sped toward Earth. Captain Elias Voss sat in the ship's central war room, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy. The Zenari front line had advanced dangerously close to the core colonies. Outposts were disappearing overnight. Earth was next. "You're saying they've started massing here?" Voss asked, pointing to a red cluster near Cygnus Prime. Admiral Hayes, standing across the table, nodded grimly. "Zenari warships are concentrating their forces in that sector. Scouts estimate a fleet of over 1,000 vessels. We have no chance of holding them back, not unless we use your enhancements." Voss looked up sharply. "You've authorized the Biocore program?" The Admiral hesitated, glancing toward the door as if someone might overhear. "Earth Command is considering it. They're concerned about the risks. You're the only subject so far, Voss. We don't know if this can be scaled up safely." Voss stood abruptly, his fists clenching. "We don't have time for hesitation. You've seen what I can do. The Zenari won't wait while we debate ethics, they're coming." Admiral Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't need a lecture, Captain. I need results. We'll have answers soon enough." Voss turned away, his jaw tightening. Hayes didn't understand. None of them did. Every minute they wasted brought Earth closer to annihilation. He felt it in his bones, the same power that had enhanced him now burned with impatience. "Dismissed, Captain," Hayes said. "Get some rest. You're going to need it." Voss didn't sleep. Instead, he found himself in the ship's empty gym, punching a reinforced steel training dummy with bone-shaking force. Each blow cracked the air like a gunshot, his muscles coiling and releasing with perfect precision. Sweat glistened on his skin, but he felt no fatigue, only the constant hum of energy coursing through his veins. Harder. Faster. Stronger. His mind replayed the battle on Eden 9 over and over. The way he had moved, the way he had killed. It had been exhilarating, but also terrifying. The artifact's power made him unstoppable, but he knew there was a line. A line he couldn't see, one he feared crossing. Captain. Voss turned sharply, his enhanced reflexes already drawing his knife before he realized who it was. Lieutenant Greer stood in the doorway, wide-eyed, his hands raised in surrender. "Easy, sir. It's just me," Greer said nervously. Voss exhaled, slipping the knife back into its sheath. "What do you want, Lieutenant?" Greer stepped inside, studying the cracked steel dummy. "Couldn't sleep either," he said. "Figured I'd check on you." "I'm fine," Voss replied flatly. Greer tilted his head. "Are you? You haven't been the same since you touched that thing. I mean, what you did on Eden 9, hell, it saved us, but you're different now." "Different how?" Voss asked, though he knew the answer. Greer hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You don't talk like yourself. You don't move like yourself. It's like you're turning into something else." Voss stared at the lieutenant, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned back to the dummy. "If being something else means we win this war, then so be it. And if it doesn't?" Greer pushed. "If that thing is changing you in ways we don't understand." "It doesn't matter," Voss snapped, his voice cold. "The Zenari aren't going to stop. Neither will I." Greer opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, the ship's alarm blared through the corridors. "All hands to battle stations. Zenari ships incoming." The Aurora shook violently as it dropped out of hyperspace, entering the embattled Cygnus Prime sector. Outside the ship, the black void of space was alive with fire. Zenari warships, massive, spiked monstrosities, swarmed the system, their energy weapons cutting through human defenses like paper. Status report. Admiral Hayes barked as Voss entered the bridge, his combat armor already in place. Enemy fleet strength confirmed at over 1,200 ships, sir, the tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. They've wiped out the outer defenses. Remaining Federation forces are collapsing. Hayes turned to Voss. "Captain, we're sending strike teams to the surface. Cygnus Prime's orbital defenses have fallen, but there's still a command relay on the ground. If we can get it online, we can coordinate reinforcements." "I'll lead the strike team," Voss said without hesitation. "Captain, this is a suicide mission," Hayes replied. "We've already lost." "We haven't lost yet," Voss growled. "I'll get it done." Hayes stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "You have your orders. Make it count." The drop pod hurtled through the atmosphere like a meteor, the heat shields glowing red-hot as they punched through the clouds. Inside, Voss sat motionless, his squad gripping their restraints with white knuckles. Outside, flashes of light illuminated the chaos, Zenari gunships strafing the ground, Federation fighters spiraling into fiery deaths. Impact in 3, 2, 1. The pod hit the ground with bone-rattling force. The doors blasted open, and Voss was the first out, his boots crunching into the dirt. Around them, Cygnus Prime burned. The colony's cities were reduced to smoldering ruins, and Zenari troops swarmed the streets. "Move! To the relay!" Voss ordered. His squad followed him into the chaos, plasma bolts streaking past them like fireflies. Voss ran at the front, faster than any man should have been, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge fire as though he could see the bullets coming. Zenari soldiers appeared from the smoke, their insectoid limbs skittering as they raised their weapons. Voss closed the distance before they could fire, his knife flashing in his hand. The first alien fell, its head severed cleanly from its body. The second didn't fare any better. "Go! I'll cover you!" Voss shouted. His squad sprinted ahead, weaving through the wreckage as Voss turned to face the oncoming Zenari forces. More of them emerged, their shrill screeches echoing in the air. Voss's plasma rifle kicked in his hands, each shot a killing blow. He moved like a phantom, too fast, too precise. Harder. Faster. Stronger. The words pulsed through his mind like a drumbeat as he fought. The Zenari didn't stand a chance. Minutes later, Voss's squad reached the relay station, a squat concrete structure buried beneath layers of rubble. "Captain. We're in." Greer's voice crackled over the comms. "Get it online." Voss shouted back, gunning down 2 more Zenari. "We need 3 minutes." Greer replied. Voss glanced toward the horizon. A massive Zenari walker, twice the size of the Dreadwalker from Eden 9, was marching toward them, its weapons already charging. "You've got 2, Voss growled. He sprinted toward the walker, his feet pounding against the ground. Plasma bolts lanced out, but Voss dodged them effortlessly, weaving through the firestorm like a ghost. The power inside him flared brighter than ever before, every muscle in his body working in perfect harmony. The walker's main cannon fired, a beam of white-hot energy searing through the earth. Voss leapt into the air, impossibly high, the beam passing harmlessly beneath him. He landed on the walker's armored hull, his knife already in hand. 1 shot. 1 chance. Voss slammed the blade into an exposed joint, tearing it open with brute strength. Sparks erupted from the walker's core as Voss ripped through its innards, planting a grenade deep inside. He jumped clear just as the walker exploded, a blinding fireball consuming the battlefield. "Relay online." Greer's voice rang in Voss's ears. "We're calling in reinforcements now." Voss stood amidst the smoke and fire, his chest rising and falling slowly. The Zenari were still coming, but it didn't matter. They would learn. Humanity was harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. And they would not break. The sky above Cygnus Prime burned red as Federation reinforcements descended like falling stars. Waves of fighter squadrons and capital ships hammered the Zenari positions, driving their forces back for the first time in years. The battlefield was chaos, flashes of light, smoke thick as tar, and the guttural screams of dying aliens. Captain Elias Voss stood on a ridge overlooking the carnage, his armor scarred and smeared with alien blood. His squad gathered behind him, their faces haggard but alive. The relay had worked. Earth had answered the call. "We're winning, Captain," Lieutenant Greer said, panting heavily as he crouched beside Voss. Voss didn't reply immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the Zenari lines, where the alien forces were beginning to retreat. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, only a cold, calculating intensity. "Not yet," Voss muttered. "They're regrouping. They always regroup." Greer glanced at him warily. "Sir, we've done enough. We should fall back and let command clean this up." Voss turned, and for a moment, Greer saw something in his captain's expression that made him uneasy. The fire in Voss's eyes, once inspiring, now burned with something darker. "Enough isn't good enough," Voss said, his voice hard. "We finish this. Push them off Cygnus Prime for good." Greer swallowed. "With all due respect, sir, the men are exhausted. You're the only one still going." Voss's jaw tightened. He could feel it, his body humming with energy, his muscles coiled and ready to spring. The artifact's power had become part of him, and it refused to let him stop. Sleep, hunger, pain, those were distant memories. The war was everything now. "Then I'll go alone," Voss said flatly, turning to head down the ridge. "Captain, wait." Greer called after him. "This isn't normal. Whatever that thing did to you, it's changing you." Voss froze mid-step, his shoulders tense. He turned slowly to face Greer. "If it's making me better, then what's the problem?" Greer stepped forward cautiously, lowering his voice. It's not just making you better, sir. It's consuming you. For a moment, neither man spoke. The distant sounds of war rumbled around them like an approaching storm. I'm fine, Voss said finally, his voice low and controlled. Now get your squad ready. We're pushing forward. Greer hesitated, but the look in Voss's eyes ended the argument. Reluctantly, he saluted and moved to rally the men. Voss turned back to the battlefield, his fists clenching. The power in his veins felt stronger than ever, a fire that threatened to consume him if he stopped moving. He wouldn't stop. Hours later, they were deep inside Zenari territory. Voss led his squad through the ruins of a shattered city, his movements eerily precise. He never slowed, never hesitated. Where Zenari ambushes would have slaughtered any normal squad, Voss cut through them with terrifying efficiency. Clear, Voss muttered, stepping over the twitching corpse of a Zenari soldier. His squad followed warily, plasma rifles raised. Captain, Greer said, breathing heavily, we've been fighting for hours. The men can't keep this up. Voss didn't look back. Then let them fall behind. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Greer moved closer, lowering his voice. Sir, listen to yourself. You're pushing too hard. Voss turned abruptly, his eyes blazing. I'm doing what needs to be done. If you want to quit, go ahead. I'll finish this alone. Greer flinched at the venom in his captain's voice. The squad fell silent, their unease growing with every step. It wasn't long before the next attack came. The Zenari had anticipated them, setting a trap deep within the city ruins. Plasma fire erupted from all sides, the alien screeches echoing through the broken streets. Ambush! Greer shouted. Cover! The squad scattered, diving behind chunks of concrete and steel. Plasma bolts hissed through the air, striking the ground and sending up sprays of molten dirt. Voss didn't flinch. He moved through the chaos like a predator, his plasma rifle barking with deadly precision. He tore through the Zenari lines, moving faster than the eye could follow. But the power, it was burning too bright. Voss felt his heartbeat racing, his vision sharpening to an unbearable clarity. Every sound echoed in his head like a thunderclap. His body moved on instinct, his mind caught somewhere between human and something else. Captain! Greer's voice broke through the haze. Voss turned sharply, his enhanced reflexes registering a Zenari soldier lunging at Greer from behind. Without thinking, Voss crossed the distance in seconds and slammed his fist into the alien's chest. There was a sickening crunch as the Zenari's carapace shattered beneath the force of the blow. Its body crumpled to the ground, twitching violently. Greer stared in horror at Voss's bloodied fist. Captain, what are you? Voss looked down at his hand, his breathing ragged. The Zenari's blood, thick and black, dripped from his knuckles, but he felt no pain. No exhaustion. Only the fire. We finish this, Voss growled. Keep moving. Sir, wait. Move. Voss roared, his voice booming like a cannon blast. The squad flinched but obeyed, pushing deeper into the city ruins. Greer lingered for a moment, his face pale as he looked at the crushed Zenari body. Then he followed, his mind racing with fear. That wasn't human. Hours later, the squad reached their objective, a Zenari command node, buried beneath a massive alien structure. The air here felt wrong, heavy, electric, as though the planet itself were angry. Voss stood at the entrance, his armor streaked with blood, his chest rising and falling slowly. Behind him, his squad sagged with exhaustion, their faces pale and hollow. This is it, Voss said. We take this out, and the Zenari lose control of their forces. Greer stepped forward, his hands trembling. Captain, we can't do this. The men can barely stand. You're the only one still going. You're not yourself. Voss turned, his eyes burning. I'm more myself than I've ever been. No, you're not, Greer said, his voice cracking. Whatever that artifact did to you, it's killing you. You don't even see it. Voss stepped closer, his presence towering over the lieutenant. We're at war, Greer. There's no room for weakness. Is that what you think? Greer shot back. Because right now, you're the one scaring us. For a moment, Voss froze. The fire inside him roared, urging him forward, demanding more. But Greer's words lingered in his mind, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. What are you becoming? Before Voss could answer, the ground shook violently. A massive Zenari warform, a creature twice the size of a dreadwalker, emerged from the structure, its limbs like steel spires, its roar splitting the air. Contact, one of the soldiers screamed. Voss turned, his eyes narrowing. Take cover. I'll handle this. Captain, N.O. Greer shouted. But Voss was already moving, sprinting straight toward the warform, the fire in his veins burning brighter than ever. The squad watched in horror as Voss leapt onto the warform, his movements faster and more brutal than they had ever seen. He tore into the creature's armor with his bare hands, ripping through it like paper. The warform screamed, its massive body thrashing, but Voss didn't stop. Blood, alien and human, spattered the ground as Voss struck again and again, his roar echoing through the battlefield. When the warform finally fell, Voss stood atop its corpse, his armor cracked, his face streaked with alien blood. His squad stared at him, wide-eyed and silent. Voss looked back at them, his chest heaving. See, he muttered, his voice hoarse. Harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. But as he stepped forward, his vision blurred. The fire in his veins twisted, and for the first time, he felt it, something inside him breaking. The silence after the Zenari warform fell was deafening. Smoke and ash swirled around Captain Elias Voss as he stood atop the monstrous corpse, its armor shattered, alien blood seeping into the ground. His squad watched him from a distance, their faces pale, eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. Elias felt the fire in his veins smoldering, a constant thrum of energy that refused to fade. He staggered, placing a hand on his knee as his vision blurred. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears, loud and unnatural, like war drums echoing through his skull. Captain. Lieutenant Greer's voice cut through the haze. Voss turned, blinking as his sight refocused. Greer and the rest of the squad had moved cautiously toward him, weapons at the ready, not at the Zenari but at him. You're hurt, Greer said carefully. You need to stand down. Voss straightened, the fire inside him flaring in protest. I'm fine. His voice was rough, almost mechanical, as though it didn't quite belong to him anymore. The mission isn't over. We need to. Captain, look at yourself. Greer shouted, stepping closer. You're bleeding everywhere. Your armor's broken, you're shaking, you can't keep this up. Voss glanced down at his hands. His gauntlets were cracked, his skin underneath blackened with Zenari ichor that seemed to cling to him, pulsing faintly. The fire roared again, whispering dark promises in the back of his mind. Harder. Faster. Stronger. Voss shook his head. I can handle it. I have to. Have to? Greer asked, his voice wavering. Listen to yourself. This thing, you said it made you stronger, but it's eating you alive. The squad murmured their agreement. Greer pointed toward the massive alien structure in the distance, its spires glowing faintly. We've destroyed their command node, Captain. We won. Reinforcements are clearing the rest of the Zenari. It's over. Voss stared past Greer, his gaze fixed on the alien fortress. The fire twisted inside him, urging him forward. It's not enough, it whispered. There's more to do. He took a step toward the structure. We're not finished. Captain. Greer barked, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. If you take one more step, I'll have no choice but to. Voss turned sharply, his enhanced reflexes making Greer flinch. To what, Lieutenant? Greer froze, staring into Voss's eyes. They glowed faintly now, the same pulsing light as the artifact. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, softly, Greer said. You're not our captain anymore, are you? The calm before the storm shattered as an urgent voice crackled through their comms. Federation command to all ground units, enemy fleet is regrouping. A second wave is incoming. Repeat, Zenari reinforcements inbound. Greer's face paled. They're regrouping. Voss turned, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the skies. Even from here, the faint glimmer of Zenari warships dropping out of hyperspace could be seen, hundreds of them, blotting out the stars. They're not retreating, Voss said coldly. They're coming back stronger. Greer swore under his breath. We need to pull back and regroup, wait for the fleet to reposition. There's no time, Voss replied. His voice was calm, almost unnaturally so. If we don't stop them now, Earth will be next. Then what do you suggest? Greer asked, his frustration boiling over. We're out of men, out of ammo, and out of time. We can't win this. Voss turned to face his squad, his presence towering over them despite his injuries. We can win this, he said, his voice steady and clear. But we need to take the fight to them. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Take the fight, where? Greer asked cautiously. Voss pointed toward the massive alien structure, the Zenari transmission spire. Its spires crackled with energy, sending signals out to the enemy fleet. That spire coordinates their movements, Voss explained. If we destroy it, we cripple their reinforcements. We have one chance to end this here. That's suicide, Greer said. We won't make it 2 steps in there. I will, Voss replied simply. You just need to cover me. The squad stared at him in disbelief. Greer took a step forward, his hands trembling. Captain, listen to me. Whatever's happening to you, whatever that artifact did, it's not worth throwing your life away. You're not invincible. Voss met his gaze, the faint glow in his eyes flickering. I have a job to do, Lieutenant. Either help me, or get out of my way. Minutes later, the squad moved toward the transmission spire, ducking through rubble and alien wreckage as Zenari forces swarmed around them. Voss led the way, his movements fluid and precise, like a predator cutting through the chaos. Suppressing fire. Greer shouted, his squad opening up with their remaining plasma rounds. The Zenari screeched in rage, their spiked limbs clawing forward. Voss moved through the fray like a ghost, dodging plasma bolts with impossible speed. He slammed into a Zenari soldier, his fist striking with enough force to crack its armor. The alien fell, twitching violently. Push forward. Voss roared. The squad followed him, their weapons blazing, but it was clear they couldn't keep up. Voss surged ahead, closing the distance to the spire in seconds. He leapt onto its surface, his enhanced strength allowing him to climb the alien structure with terrifying speed. Captain, come back. Greer's voice crackled in his earpiece. You can't do this alone. I'm not alone, Voss muttered to himself, his mind a blur of rage and fire. At the top of the spire, Voss found the transmission core, a massive crystalline structure pulsing with energy. Its glow matched the light now flickering in his eyes. The fire inside him roared. Harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. He stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the core. Energy crackled across his skin, pulling him closer. Images flashed in his mind, humans enhanced beyond imagination, unstoppable warriors carving through the Zenari like gods of war. This is the answer, he whispered. Join us. The voice was alien, yet familiar. It echoed through his mind like a siren's song. Take the power. Become more. Voss hesitated. For the first time, he felt the weight of the choice before him. The fire had pushed him this far, but at what cost? Was this the price of victory, his humanity? Captain. Greer's voice broke through the haze. Do you hear me? Don't do this. Voss blinked, his hand hovering over the core. Sweat dripped down his face as his mind fought against the fire. He could end the war. He could save Earth. But would there be anything left of him? With a roar of defiance, Voss tore his hand back. He drew a grenade from his belt, primed it, and hurled it into the core. The transmission spire shuddered violently, energy arcing in all directions. Voss turned and leapt from the tower as the explosion erupted behind him, a blinding light that lit up the sky. On the ground, Greer and the squad watched as the spire collapsed in a plume of fire and debris. The Zenari forces froze, their movements faltering. It's working. Greer shouted. They're falling apart. Amidst the chaos, Voss staggered back to his squad, his armor scorched, his breathing ragged. Greer caught him as he collapsed. You did it, sir, Greer said, relief flooding his voice. The fleet's retreating. Voss managed a faint smile. Not bad, for humans. Then, his vision went dark, and the fire finally flickered out. Captain Elias Voss awoke to silence. Not the eerie calm of a battlefield after a fight, nor the hum of a ship's engine in hyperspace, but a silence so profound it pressed against his ears like water. When he opened his eyes, the world around him swam into focus. Bright, sterile light spilled down from a ceiling that stretched into infinity. He was lying on a medical table, the weight of his body unfamiliar, his movements sluggish. Where am I? He tried to sit up, but restraints clamped over his wrists and ankles. Panic flared briefly before the fire, so familiar now, rumbled inside him, steadying his nerves. You're awake, a voice said. Voss turned his head. A man stood at the edge of the room, clad in a pristine Federation officer's uniform. His hair was gray, his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp. Admiral Hayes. Where am I? Voss demanded, his voice hoarse. Hayes stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back. You're aboard Sanctuary Station. After you destroyed the transmission spire on Cygnus Prime, you collapsed. We had to bring you here for evaluation. Evaluation? Voss tugged at the restraints, feeling them strain under his enhanced strength. Why am I restrained? Hayes frowned. For your safety, and ours. The doctors, they're concerned. Concerned? Voss growled, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. About what? Hayes glanced at the observation window to his left, where a group of scientists whispered behind reinforced glass. He hesitated before answering. About you, Captain, Hayes said finally. Your enhancements. They've progressed far beyond what we expected. The scans show changes. Your muscle structure, your neural pathways. You're no longer entirely human. Voss froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. No longer entirely human. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. They seemed normal, scarred, steady, but deep inside, he could feel it, the hum of something alien, something other. The fire that had driven him to victory was still there, coiled like a snake in his veins. And what do you plan to do about it? Voss asked quietly. Hayes's expression hardened. That depends on you. We need answers, Captain. The artifact gave you strength beyond anything we've ever seen, but at what cost? Our scientists think it's rewriting your DNA, turning you into something else. Something else, Voss echoed bitterly. And what does Earth think? Am I a hero, or a monster? Hayes looked away. They're scared, Voss. Scared of you, and what you represent. Hours later, Voss sat alone in his cell. It wasn't a prison, not exactly, but the walls were reinforced steel, and the door was locked from the outside. He could hear faint murmurs through the vents, doctors discussing his condition, guards whispering his name like it was a curse. Captain Elias Voss. The man who destroyed the Zenari spire. The man who wasn't human anymore. Voss ran a hand over his face, his fingers trembling. The fire was stronger now, pulsing through him like a second heartbeat. It whispered to him in the silence, its voice soft but insistent. They don't understand. They're weak. You're stronger. You can save them all. Shut up, Voss muttered, pressing his palms to his temples. But the voice wouldn't stop. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time blurred in the sterile confines of his cell. Voss was subjected to endless tests, scans, blood draws, strength trials. Every time, the results were the same. He was changing. His body healed faster now. The burns and wounds from Cygnus Prime had vanished within hours. His senses were sharper, he could hear conversations 2 rooms away, see the faint hum of power lines in the walls. And his strength. During one test, Voss had crushed a solid steel rod in his hands without trying. The scientists hadn't said a word, but their fear had been palpable. One day, Admiral Hayes returned. This time, his face was drawn, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "We need to talk," Hayes said, his voice low. Voss sat on the edge of his cot, his gaze unflinching. "Talk." Hayes took a breath. "The Zenari are back. They're rallying their remaining forces for a full-scale assault on Earth. We expect them to arrive within days." Voss felt a flicker of cold dread. "What are you doing to stop them?" Hayes hesitated. "The BioCore program, your enhancements, have been replicated. We're deploying enhanced soldiers to defend Earth." "You used the artifact?" Voss asked sharply, rising to his feet. Hayes nodded. "In part. We reverse-engineered what we could. The results aren't perfect. Most of the soldiers are unstable. Some didn't survive the process." Voss clenched his fists. "You pushed them too far." "We had no choice," Hayes replied. "The Zenari are coming, and we're out of time. Earth needs every advantage we can get." For a long moment, Voss said nothing. Then he stepped forward, his eyes burning. "Let me fight." Hayes shook his head. "You're too dangerous. We don't know how much longer you'll remain in control. If you..." "I'm still me," Voss growled. "You need me, Hayes. You know it." Hayes looked at him, uncertainty flickering across his face. Finally, he sighed. "You'll be under strict supervision. 1 squad. 1 mission. You'll fight when the Zenari arrive, but if you lose control..." Voss met his gaze, unflinching. "I won't." The skies over Earth darkened as the Zenari fleet arrived. Massive warships blotted out the sun, their weapons igniting the atmosphere with fire. Cities fell within hours, their defenses overwhelmed. Humanity's last hope lay in its enhanced soldiers, the product of the BioCore program. And at the head of them stood Captain Elias Voss. He led his squad into the heart of the invasion, the fire in his veins roaring like an inferno. Zenari soldiers fell before him in waves, their weapons useless against his speed, his strength. He tore through them like a hurricane, his squad struggling to keep up. "Push forward!" Voss shouted, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "We end this here." The enhanced soldiers followed him, their bodies augmented but unstable. Some moved with superhuman speed, others with brute strength, but cracks were showing. One soldier faltered, clutching his head as blood dripped from his nose. Another screamed as his enhanced body collapsed, his mind unable to keep up with the power coursing through him. "Captain, they're breaking." Greer's voice crackled through Voss's calm, "The enhancements, they're killing us. Voss paused, his chest heaving. Around him, the battlefield was chaos, but his mind was razor-sharp. He could feel it too, the fire pushing him further, burning brighter, demanding more. He looked at his men, their faces twisted in pain, and for the first time, the fire whispered a truth he couldn't ignore. This is the cost. Voss clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Fall back, he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. Get the wounded out of here. What about you? Greer shouted. Voss turned toward the Zenari warship looming on the horizon, its weapons charging for a final, devastating strike. I'll finish it. Captain, N.O. But Voss was already moving, his body a blur of motion as he sprinted toward the ship. The fire inside him roared, its voice deafening. Harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. And as he leapt into the heart of the enemy, he whispered back. At any cost. The world was on fire. Earth's skies were blackened by Zenari warships, their cannons raining destruction across continents. Cities crumbled into dust, oceans boiled, and humanity's last defenders scattered like ash in the wind. In the midst of it all, Captain Elias Voss sprinted through the ruins of what had once been New Geneva, his enhanced body moving faster than any human eye could follow. Around him, Zenari soldiers swarmed, their spiked limbs cutting through retreating soldiers as they pushed deeper into Earth's defenses. But where they met Voss, they fell. He was a blur of motion, faster than plasma fire, stronger than steel. His fists shattered exoskeletons, his knife slashed through hardened carapaces, and his rifle barked death with machine-like precision. Blood, human and alien, spattered the ground as Voss carved a path toward his true target, the Zenari dreadnought hovering over the city's core. The ship was a behemoth, its spiked silhouette dark against the ash-filled sky. From its underside, glowing fissures pulsed as it charged its primary cannon, enough firepower to wipe out everything for miles. If Voss didn't stop it, New Geneva would be reduced to a smoking crater. The fire inside him flared, brighter than ever. His mind hummed with perfect clarity, the whispers of the artifact drowning out the sounds of war. Push harder. Be faster. Be more. Voss vaulted over a pile of debris, landing with unnatural grace just as his comm crackled to life. Captain. Captain Voss, do you copy? It was Lieutenant Greer, his voice frantic. Copy, Voss replied coldly, sprinting toward the dreadnought's landing struts. Where the hell are you going? Greer demanded. We're falling back. Earth Command has ordered a full retreat, there's nothing left to save. I can stop this, Voss said, leaping onto the dreadnought's outer hull. His fingers dug into the alien metal, finding purchase where no human hands should have been able to. Captain, listen to me. Greer shouted, his voice cracking. You're not invincible. Whatever's keeping you on your feet, it's tearing you apart. You won't survive this. Voss paused for the briefest of moments, hanging from the hull as the dreadnought's vibrations rumbled through him. His mind flashed to his squad, to Greer, to the countless soldiers who had fought and died for Earth. I don't matter, Voss said quietly. Captain. Voss cut the comm. He couldn't afford distractions. Not now. Scaling the dreadnought was impossible for any normal soldier. Its hull stretched for kilometers, bristling with weapon emplacements and energy shields. But Voss wasn't normal anymore. His enhanced strength and speed made him a living weapon, and he climbed with grim determination. Plasma turrets tracked his movements, but he was too fast. He leapt across the hull, weaving through enemy fire as the whispers in his mind grew louder. Almost there. When he reached the upper surface, Voss planted his boots against the hull and sprinted toward a maintenance hatch near the ship's command center. The Zenari crew spotted him too late. Voss tore the hatch open with his bare hands, leapt inside, and disappeared into the dreadnought's heart. Inside, the air was thick and humid, the walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins of energy. Zenari soldiers scuttled toward him, their shrieks echoing through the corridors. Voss didn't slow. The fire inside him burned brighter with every step, urging him forward. He moved faster than thought, cutting through the aliens like a scythe through wheat. His knife gleamed in the flickering light, his rifle crackling as it fired in short, lethal bursts. But something was wrong. His vision blurred at the edges, his hands trembling even as they struck with inhuman force. He could feel his body straining, the enhancements pushing him beyond his limits. For the first time, pain crept into the fire. Not now, he thought. Just a little further. The Zenari Command Core was a massive chamber at the center of the ship, its walls lined with crystalline control nodes. In the center of the room, the ship's primary power source, a glowing orb of alien energy, pulsed with every beat of the dreadnought's cannon, growing brighter by the second. Voss stumbled into the chamber, his breath ragged. Sweat poured down his face, and his vision swam as the whispers grew deafening. Take it. Use it. Become more. No, Voss growled, clutching his head. The Zenari commander emerged from the shadows, towering over him. Its black carapace glistened in the dim light, and its 6 limbs moved with terrifying grace as it hissed in its alien tongue. Human, it said, its voice like grinding metal. You have come far. But you will fall. Voss staggered to his feet, gripping his knife tightly. I've heard that before. The commander lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Voss dodged, barely, his movements slower now, his body rebelling against him. The commander struck again, a claw raking across Voss's chestplate and sending him sprawling. Pain flared through him, bright and searing. The whispers screamed in his mind. You're weak. Take the power. Use it. Voss pushed himself up, blood dripping from his mouth. The commander advanced, towering over him. You cannot win, the alien hissed. Voss looked past it, his gaze locking on the glowing power core. Energy rippled through the room, surging like a living storm. Maybe not, Voss whispered. But I can make sure you lose. Summoning the last of his strength, Voss hurled his knife. It spun through the air and struck the core dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the room erupted in white-hot light. The Zenari commander screeched as the energy surged outward, consuming everything. Voss felt the fire inside him flare one last time, brighter than ever, before it finally shattered. From the ground, Lieutenant Greer and the remaining Federation soldiers watched as the Zenari dreadnought above New Geneva cracked apart in a blinding explosion. Fire rained from the sky, the shockwave flattening everything in its path. Greer shielded his eyes, his heart sinking. Captain. The dreadnought's remains crashed to the earth, a final death rattle echoing through the battlefield. The Zenari forces, leaderless and disorganized, faltered. Across Earth, reports flooded in, the enemy was retreating. Humanity had survived. But at what cost? Days later, the war was declared over. The Zenari fleet, broken and scattered, limped back into deep space. Earth mourned its dead but celebrated its survival. In a quiet memorial hall in New Geneva, Greer stood before a plaque etched with names, those who had given everything for humanity's survival. At the top of the list was Captain Elias Voss. He saved us, Greer whispered, touching the plaque. But we couldn't save him. Outside, the sun shone brightly over the ruined city. Life had returned, fragile but determined. Humanity had been pushed to its limits, but it had endured. As Greer turned to leave, he thought he heard something faint on the wind. A whisper, soft as a breath. Harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. And for a moment, he wondered if Voss was truly gone, or if a part of him still lingered, watching, waiting. The ruins of New Geneva were slowly being rebuilt. Weeks had passed since the final battle, and humanity had begun to crawl out of the ashes of near extinction. The Zenari were gone, shattered and leaderless, their warships scattered across the galaxy like drifting corpses. But the scars remained. Lieutenant Greer stood on the remains of what had once been the city's central plaza, now a staging ground for relief efforts. Construction drones buzzed in the distance, lifting debris and laying the first foundations of a new world. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians worked side by side, driven by a singular purpose: to rebuild. Yet for all the activity, a heaviness hung over the air, a silence where there should have been celebration. Humanity had won the war, but the cost of victory weighed on them like iron chains. "Lieutenant," a young sergeant said, approaching cautiously. "The council is asking for you." Greer turned, his face lined with exhaustion. "Where?" "They're in the War Museum," the sergeant replied. "The artifacts being moved today." The New Geneva War Museum had once been a government building before the invasion. Now, its grand halls housed the relics of humanity's darkest hours, and its greatest triumphs. Greer walked through the exhibit quietly, passing displays of shattered Zenari armor, ruined Federation warships, and photos of the countless lives lost. At the center of the largest chamber stood the artifact. It was smaller than he remembered, a crystalline structure glowing faintly behind a glass containment field. Around it, a team of scientists and Federation officials debated its future. Lieutenant Greer, an older man said, stepping forward. Greer recognized him immediately, Admiral Hayes, now a war hero in the eyes of the people. "Sir," Greer said, offering a tired salute. Hayes returned the gesture with a nod. "You've been quiet since the war ended, Lieutenant. I imagine you've had a lot on your mind." Greer glanced at the artifact, its glow pulsing softly like a dying heartbeat. "I've had enough time to think, sir. I'm still not sure what I believe." Hayes gestured for Greer to follow him as they walked past the containment field. "The Council has decided to move the artifact to a secure research facility on Mars," Hayes said. "There's too much we don't know about it. Too many risks." "You mean too many Vossas," Greer said bitterly, his voice low. Hayes stopped and turned to him. Captain Voss was a hero. He was, Greer agreed, his tone sharpening. But he was also a warning. That thing, it changed him. We don't know where it ends. Hayes regarded him silently for a moment. "You were with him until the end. Tell me, Lieutenant. Did he lose himself?" Greer met the Admiral's gaze, the memories still raw in his mind, Voss sprinting toward the Zenari dreadnought, his body battered, his mind fraying, the fire consuming him from the inside. "I don't know," Greer admitted finally. "But he saved us. That's what matters." Hayes nodded. "And maybe that's enough." Later that night, Greer returned to the War Memorial, a quiet place near the rebuilt edge of New Geneva. A bronze statue of Captain Elias Voss stood tall in the center, his likeness carved into eternal defiance. The plaque at its base read, "Captain Elias Voss, the first, the last, the strongest." Greer stared up at the statue, his mind swirling. He remembered Voss's words before the final battle. "I don't matter." Did Voss really believe that? That his life, his humanity, was worth sacrificing? Or had the artifact's fire warped him into something that could no longer see where the man ended and the weapon began? Thinking about him again. Greer turned sharply. A woman stood behind him, her silhouette familiar in the faint moonlight. It was Dr. Imani Rhodes, one of the Federation scientists who had studied the artifact. "Dr. Rhodes," Greer said, exhaling slowly. "What are you doing out here?" She approached, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her coat. "I come here sometimes," she admitted. "To remind myself what we're dealing with." Greer raised an eyebrow. "The artifact?" "Yes," she said softly. "And Captain Voss. He became, something we don't understand. Something more. But the truth is, the artifact didn't make him a hero." "What do you mean?" Greer asked, frowning. Rhodes looked up at the statue, her expression pensive. The artifact amplified him. It made him stronger, faster. But it didn't give him the will to fight. That came from him. From who he was. Greer considered her words. You think Voss was always capable of doing what he did? Rhodes nodded. He didn't sacrifice himself because of the artifact. He sacrificed himself because he believed humanity was worth saving. The artifact didn't make him brave, Lieutenant. It only made him, more. The words sank into Greer like stones. A week later, the artifact was moved. Federation scientists encased it in layers of protective shielding before loading it onto a secure transport ship bound for Mars. From orbit, Greer watched through a viewport as the small vessel disappeared into the void. What if we're making a mistake? He asked quietly. Admiral Hayes, standing beside him, didn't look away from the stars. What kind of mistake? Locking it away, Greer replied. Pretending it doesn't exist. What if the Zenari come back? What if someone worse comes next? Hayes turned to him, his gaze heavy. And what if we become the thing we fear? What if we use it and lose ourselves? Greer didn't answer. Somewhere deep inside, he knew Hayes was right. Humanity had paid a steep price to survive, but they had survived because of Elias Voss, a man who had walked the edge of the abyss and chosen to burn himself out for the sake of others. Somewhere in the stars, Greer wondered, would they need another Elias Voss one day? And would they dare take the same risk? Years later, on a barren outpost at the edge of human space, a scout ship discovered something unusual. Buried beneath the sands of an alien world was another artifact, larger than the first, its crystalline surface pulsing faintly with light. The expedition scientists studied it cautiously, running their hands over its surface as it hummed softly beneath their touch. One of them turned to their commander, his voice tinged with awe. Do you think it's like the first one? The commander studied the artifact, his eyes narrowing. I hope not. He turned back toward the landing site, barking orders to secure the object for transport. As the scientists worked, the artifact pulsed once, softly, as if waking from a long slumber. In the quiet of deep space, where the stars burned cold and ancient, a faint whisper stirred. Harder. Better. Faster. Stronger. And somewhere, deep in the collective memory of humanity, the name Elias Voss lingered like a spark waiting for fuel, waiting to burn once more.